Oh, are we about to leave the traditional approach?
Yes.
Because I got one thing I'd like to add, and actually a question to you guys too as well,
You go,
because
Brent.
it's something we come up against all the time. Is that I think it's really important for everybody to understand that, I mean, you already know how important your box is. I mean, it's the biggest thing, you know, in terms of your communication in store. But for our potential partners, I think a lot of companies, and you are thinking about it, and I know that there's some hardware issues and constraints with some of your platform licenses, but there's huge value of that real estate for us in store. And we're trying to find the ways of how can we leverage that for our clients to get some access to that box. Because you're sitting there, I mean, you know, you're basically got a nice little ad sitting there, you know, at Walmart behind the glass, and how can we enter into a joint promotional agreement, say with an Activision property?
Well, that's something we're actually going to touch on fairly shortly. So
okay, sure.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. So the next big question, I guess, and actually before I move on, can I take a quick straw poll? How many of you here are from publishers? Ooh, 1 or 2. The developers know where you are now. You'll be lucky to make it to the door. From developers, how many people? Okay, again. The media? Very brave of you to admit it. And the rest of you just hang around. That's fine. That's fine. Well, one of the most influential, one of the most interesting areas in the games market just now is that of games based on licenses. In any given week in the UK, licensed games account for around about 70% of the top 10. So it's becoming a far greater input than it was, you know, even 18 months or 2 years ago. So there are a number of issues to do with licensed games, which obviously have an impact on marketing. Now, again, we have LucasArts, we have John from Activision. These guys have all worked with licenses at one point or another. So, can I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, how does working on a licensed title affect the type of marketing you do? How does it affect the budget that you command? And basically, how do you market the hell out of something that is already being marketed in another media game?
Well, I can use Spider-Man as an example of everything. When all the stars align and everything goes right. The key, there's a lot of things going on with movie licenses of video games. In the past, I mean, if you look back on older platforms, a movie license didn't really bring you anything in the name of quality and the perception of a gamer. Time and time again, you talk to a gamer, and he's like, "Oh, it's a movie game. It's gonna stink because it's a movie game." And part of that was because I think movie studios were merchandising out their licensing rights near the end of the movie development phase, along with T-shirts, along with, you know, caps and cups and packaged goods things, and they didn't recognize that video game companies take 2 plus years to make a good game. That's starting to change, and I think we're also seeing a little bit of a convergence of demographics in the terms of movies and video games. Teen boys in particular seem to be a lot stronger on this generation of platforms than they were on preceding generations of platforms, where the platforms started to skew younger earlier in the console phase. And right now, if you look at the demographics on PS2 or Xbox, even GameCube, you're still looking at 13 to 17-year-old males predominantly playing your games. And that's who Hollywood wants to have filling their seats in Spider-Man or X-Men when those movies open up. So there's a great synergy that's starting to happen where the movie studios are realizing that this is a great extension of their brand. And they're starting to work with us a lot earlier in that respect. But it still comes down to the game quality. And with movie licenses, you know, going all over the place, they're getting more expensive. It's not enough anymore just to have the license for Spider-Man and not make a good game out of it. You've got to capture the flavor of that character that you're licensing. The Lord of the Rings from EA did a great job of incorporating not just the dynamic of the characters from the movie, but also actual movie footage, and really expanded upon that license. So just that's a big picture kind of overrun. But when it comes down to working with a licensor, you've really got to pay attention to the guidelines they set for you. And many licensors are very protective of their properties. And they will give you style guides or they will give you strict guidelines. And one of the big differences is that you just don't have the freedom to go and be as creative as you might want to be. And you always have to answer to somebody at the end of the day as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. So you need to have specialized personnel who are able to track your approvals, who are able to work with the creative teams to make sure that they're fitting in your guidelines, make sure that your PR teams are spreading the word properly, not revealing things about the license they're not supposed to, and so forth. I'll pass it over to Liz for the follow-up.
I think, you say, I've got a great license, I'm set and I'm done, and I think John made a really good point that it's really got to be about game quality. I think, in particular, the Star Wars license could be an amazing blessing, and it often is, but it's really a challenge because consumers' expectations are always very high, and you want to also develop in the right genre that's appropriate with the right kind of gameplay. We, of course, have our own license challenges, even though they sit down the hall, because George is a little protective of the brand, but we've been able to do some really unique things, and I think when you can move outside of the box, you have a pretty unique opportunity where you're expanding beyond like the movie license. So one of my challenges on a day-to-day basis is how to keep this franchise and this license alive in the midst of different movies. So in the 2 years it takes to develop a film, how are we going to keep the customers excited and the Star Wars fan base interested, and keep delivering titles that are unique and interesting. And one of the nice things that we've done recently is this lovely little game we're working with BioWare on called Knights of the Old Republic, where we were able to go back 4,000 years prior to any of the first Star Wars movies taking place. And so then you get some sort of unique freedoms and you can introduce the concept of the Jedi and things like that. But I think, it sounds, I guess the point I really just want to make is it sounds like this great breath of fresh air. I'm golden if I've got a license, and the challenges are pretty unique. So where you have sort of a common denominator in the education that you might have to do with an innovative or original title doesn't have to take place, you are constantly having to prove yourselves, and you're only as good as your last title, and you have to make it such an exciting and interesting game that, and we do have such savvy consumers that I think it becomes a continuous challenge.
Can I just ask, Liz, from a marketing perspective, when you're working with a major license, whether it's based on a specific movie or whether it's like Knights of the Old Republic, do you actually have, does the license benefit you in terms of marketing just because of the general awareness of the game? Is it possible to market a game like Knights of the Old Republic, which isn't tied in with it? I'm getting to the point, trust me. Is it possible to market a game like that with a small budget, or is this something that's really going to have to go out and you're going to have to hit all of the key Star Wars points across the board?
I think, although we're not going to do it on that title, I think there are some titles that we would market with a small budget for exactly that reason. The education isn't necessary. You've got a known quantity. Of course, you want to blow it out, and I think the new statistic is something like 108 titles launched per month. So there's just a lot of noise out there. So, of course, you'd want to make yourself compelling, but that's, again, where you probably want to get to that influencer or those key influencers, whether it be the press or your core consumers, and whatever's appropriate for that kind of title or genre. And I think you could do it with a low budget because you don't have all the hard work of trying to present a new franchise, genre, characters, game features, or whatever's innovative about your gameplay.
Okay, excellent. So,
Actually,
go on.
I sort of actually an interesting group of points that come out of that discussions. One is developers tend to see licenses. They've actually in the past, a more accurate way to say it, tended to see licenses one of two ways: either a quick cash grab, where you kind of knock off a quick title, or as a multiplier. And what I mean by multipliers, if you make a great game, your engine carries so far, the content can carry so far, but the license actually multiplies your potential return. And we've always approached it from the perspective that if you make a great game and you have a great license, it's just superb. From a marketing perspective, it's very interesting being in the development end because you're in a sense, you're the end of the line in the approvals process. I think there was some mention of that. And if you're having to walk into someone's room and say, oh, we've been working on this for 3 weeks, 12 hours a day, you got to change it all now. because we weren't careful enough with the license, we weren't worrying about our alliance with the licensor, we didn't communicate well enough. That's something you don't want to do. You know, on the one hand, you want to understand what the license is, but second, you really want to be in contact with people making decisions on the license. And it's very important to know how people want the game made, and you have to make sure you tune the team's mind into thinking this is how they want the game made, and try and make it that way. You always try and find little things you can add to make it fun and make it your own, but it's very important to know what the licensor wants and try and stick within that. And I mean, it's the interesting thing with LucasArts. I mean, they're vertically integrated with Lucasfilm, and so it's been a very smooth licensing process. But some, we talked to some friends at some deals, and it can be quite arduous at times.
The hardcore gamer, while they're probably not buying their games at Walmart is selling predominantly a lot of the games, correct me if I'm not. And just like everything out there in North America, Walmart's the most important thing out there. And I think for a publisher and a developer, a license from a movie is extremely important, because if you have the right one and you take a look at Spider-Man, you've got Walmart across their entire store when the movie launches. We'll be having Spider-Man blown out everywhere. In every single aisle, there'll be hundreds of products carrying Spider-Man promotions, and your license is sitting there in the video game aisle, and it's kicking butt, and Walmart's going to support that. So in a lot of cases, when you're looking at Walmart, if you have a licensed gaming property, and it happens to be a license that Walmart's really excited about because of the movie, you're sitting pretty good as a video game company.
That's true. Is it something, can I ask you, especially Brent, is it something you think the games industry is actually getting better at? Is identifying the key licenses and then making use of it and being able to make the most out of any license?
I think they're getting better at leveraging, because that's the thing, is that, and that's what we're always looking at, is the license has definitely equity that's already out there. And then of course all the marketing that the studio, or even say a television show or a network has, Alias and ABC, there's so much value and equity that has been built there, and definitely brand exposure. So as long as, it's all a matter of everybody just really kind of working together, and then hopefully you find that right mix. And I mean, of course the game's got to kick butt. I mean, that's just it, right? But if you have the right license and you can leverage all the different points where that property is exposed at, then I think that you've got that ability to attract definitely some of that key thing to make it a win at Walmart. And that's kind of important.
True.
One of the big questions, though, I mean, there's about 5 or 6 licenses a year that are consistently popular, and then there's a bunch of question marks. And if you're, if you're a smaller publisher and you're going against EA or Activision to go after Spider-Man, you're probably not going to have the resources to bid because the costs are so high. And so you have to look at what, at riskier licensing ventures. And the only tips I can give there is to make sure that first of all, the license is still breathing in some respect. I mean, I've seen people announce licenses recently of TV shows that got canceled 6 months later, or of comic book properties that aren't even in the top 10 comic books. So you really have to pick and choose, because you know what? You're spending money against a license in hopes that that's going to give you awareness or affinity at retail. And if that license, and that's money that you could be using to make your game better, that's money you could be using to boost your marketing campaign. So if you're going to bet on a license, you better make sure that that license is going to bring you an audience and that it's pertinent to the type of game you're making.
From a marketing point of view, can I ask Liz and John again, do licensors come in with a certain minimum expectation of how you're going to support any given license within marketing? Do you have to commit to a certain marketing spend, or do they offer to tie in with the movie or TV show or whatever, or is it still very much an uphill struggle to try and integrate everything together?
The answer to the first question is yes. They usually put something in your contract that has a minimum guarantee. And if you're smart, you can make it a very general statement so you don't get stuck having to buy certain types of media or things like that. The second part is, I guess, actually, can you repeat the second part?
I was asking if games licensors come in with that, and no. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. And are games companies getting better
Oh,
at
yeah.
actually making use of that and integrating in with the movie or TV show?
It really depends on the licensors' leverage in the case of a movie with the director. And you look at what Wachowski brothers have done in basically, forcing Warner Brothers to work with Atari. I mean, the Wachowski brothers as directors basically helped the Atari case because they were big gamers. But with Warner, I mean, who knows if that would have happened if it had been the merchandising people at Warner. In the case of Spider-Man, we had access early on to Sam Raimi and to some of the producers on the film, so we were able to go in and see the set designs, to see the costume designs, to get a look at the script, to get a look at early animatics a year and a half away from the launch of the film. So that was definitely very helpful. But with other licensors we worked at, it's been a struggle to get access. And sometimes you have to go through different layers of people in a studio. There's a merchandising team, there's a licensing team, there's a theatrical marketing team, there's a home video team, and they don't necessarily know who to talk to. And so there is a Byzantine layer that you sometimes have to navigate to get what you need.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, we've looked fairly specifically at movies at the moment, simply because we have the expertise here. But some of the bigger licenses out there are based on personalities. Again, Activision have Tony Hawk's. And sports, you'll be able to look at something like EA's FIFA brand or Formula One or any of the larger sports licenses to see that these actually have a lot more longevity. They're not relying on the release of a single TV show or a single movie. They're actually ongoing. So, from your experience, do you guys see that these longer life licenses can be marketed less aggressively because you don't have to have the immediate impact of the movie release?
I think that's another case-by-case instance. I think the difference between a movie license and a personality likeness is that personality tends to add more legitimacy to that sport or that activity if you pick the right personality. So, for example, a Madden football, having Madden, and everything EA has made Madden entail means that game is going to have the up-to-date rosters. When you talk to the consumers, they know that Madden stands for something. When they see Tony Hawk on a package, now they realize that Tony Hawk's going to be the best skateboarding game because of all the tricks and all the cool controls and everything that the brand has come to symbolize. But neither of those franchises started out that way, and they had to be built that way through the game quality again. And the very first Madden was a lot different from Madden of today, and the very first Tony Hawk was a gamble. We didn't know if it was going to bring in new people or not. We knew Tony Hawk was a big personality, but the game was one of the best games that Activision's ever made, and as such, and Tony happened to pull off his 900 the same summer that we put our game out. So, again, we had good alignment with what happened with his career and what happened with a great game launch, and then we were able to build that into the franchise that it is now, and now it stands for something.